The clock on the wall showed 11:47 p.m. as Lucy wiped down the last table at Le Jardin restaurant. Her feet were killing her after another 14-hour shift, but she couldn't complain. Every dollar counted these days. She looked around the fancy dining room with its crystal chandeliers and gold-trimmed walls. Just hours ago, this place was buzzing with rich people laughing over expensive wine and steaks that cost more than she made in a week. Now it was quiet, empty, and somehow felt cold despite the warm lighting. Lucy grabbed her cleaning cloth and started working on the marble tables. Her hands moved automatically. She'd done this routine thousands of times over the past 3 years. Wipe, spray, wipe again. Move to the next table, repeat. But her mind wandered somewhere else entirely. As she cleaned, she hummed a piece by Bach that she used to play back in college. Her fingers, rough from constant cleaning and dishwashing, unconsciously moved like she was playing piano keys on the table surface. 3 years ago, everything was different. Back then, she was studying at one of the best music schools in the country. She had dreams of performing in concert halls, maybe even recording albums someday. Her professors always said she had real talent, the kind that comes along once in a blue moon. But dreams don't pay bills. When her dad got sick and couldn't work anymore, Lucy had to make a choice. Keep studying music and watch her family lose their house, or drop out and start working. It wasn't really a choice at all. She still remembered the day she packed up her dorm room. Her roommate cried harder than she did. Her music theory books went into storage, along with her sheet music collection and the small keyboard she practiced on when the school's piano rooms were full. The hardest part was telling Professor Williams. He'd been like a mentor to her, always pushing her to be better, always believing in her potential. When she explained why she had to leave, he offered to help with scholarships and loans. But the numbers just didn't add up. Her family needed money now, not in 4 years when she might graduate. Working at Le Jardin wasn't the worst job in the world, but it wasn't easy either. The customers were mostly wealthy business people and socialites who treated the staff like they were invisible. They'd snap their fingers when they wanted something, never bothered to learn anyone's name, and left messes like someone else would always clean up after them. Lucy had gotten used to it mostly. She learned to smile and nod, to say yes sir and right away ma'am even when people were rude. The tips were decent and her boss, Mr. Peterson, was fair enough. He even let her pick up extra shifts when she needed them. But the hardest moments came when she least expected them. Like when she'd hear classical music playing softly in the restaurant's bathroom, and her heart would ache remembering what it felt like to create that beauty instead of just listening to it. Or when she'd see a piano in a hotel lobby and have to stop herself from sitting down and playing. The apartment she shared with 2 other girls was tiny, but it was all she could afford. Her portion of the rent took up most of her paycheck, and the rest went to groceries and helping her parents with Dad's medical bills. There was never anything left over for luxuries like concert tickets or music lessons. Sometimes late at night when her roommates were asleep, Lucy would watch videos of pianists performing online. She'd close her eyes and imagine her own fingers moving across the keys, feeling the music flow through her like it used to. But then morning would come, and she'd put on her black work pants and white shirt and head back to the restaurant. Her college friends had mostly lost touch with her. They were busy with their final semesters, preparing for graduation, talking about job interviews and future plans. Lucy felt like she was stuck in a different world, one where dreams took a backseat to survival. The student loans were the worst part. Even though she'd only completed 2 years of school, she still owed thousands of dollars. The payments were small but constant, a monthly reminder of the education she couldn't finish and the career she'd given up. As Lucy finished cleaning the last table, she caught her reflection in the restaurant's big mirror. She looked tired, older than her 26 years. Her hands, once soft from piano practice, were now rough and red from cleaning chemicals, but something inside her still burned bright. When she hummed those classical pieces, when her fingers moved like they were dancing on piano keys, she felt like her real self again. Not just Lucy the waitress, but Lucy the musician, Lucy the dreamer. She didn't know it yet, but tomorrow would bring an opportunity that would change everything. Tonight, though, she just wanted to go home, soak her feet, and maybe watch one more piano performance video before falling asleep. The restaurant's lights dimmed as she gathered her things. Another day was done and another would begin soon enough. But for now, she carried her music in her heart, humming softly as she walked into the quiet night. Tuesday afternoon was usually slow at Le Jardin, but today felt different. Lucy was refilling water glasses when she noticed Mrs. Victoria Ashworth sitting at table 7, her usual spot by the window. Mrs. Ashworth was what people called old money. Designer clothes, perfect makeup, and the kind of confidence that came from never worrying about bills. She'd been coming to the restaurant twice a week for months, always ordering the same thing: salmon with a side salad and sparkling water with lime. Lucy had served her dozens of times, but Mrs. Ashworth had never really looked at her before. Today was different. "Excuse me, dear," Mrs. Ashworth called out in her crisp accent. "Could you come here for a moment?" Lucy walked over, expecting another request for extra bread or a different fork. Instead, Mrs. Ashworth studied her face like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "You're always humming when you work," Mrs. Ashworth said suddenly. "Classical music, isn't it? I heard you doing Vivaldi yesterday, and today it sounded like Mozart." Lucy felt her cheeks turn red. She didn't realize anyone had noticed her quiet humming. "I'm sorry if it bothered you, ma'am. I'll try to be quieter." "Oh no, don't apologize. It's quite lovely, actually. You have good taste in music." Mrs. Ashworth leaned back in her chair, still watching Lucy carefully. "Tell me, do you play piano?" The question hit Lucy like a punch to the stomach. She hesitated, not sure how to answer. I used to study music, yes, ma'am." "Used to?" Mrs. Ashworth raised an eyebrow. "What happened?" Lucy shifted uncomfortably. This was getting too personal, and she had other tables to serve. "Life happened, I guess. Can I get you anything else today?" But Mrs. Ashworth wasn't done. "I'm hosting a charity event this Saturday evening. A fundraiser for the Children's Hospital. We need extra serving staff, and frankly, most catering companies send people who don't understand how to work with refined guests." She paused, looking Lucy up and down like she was evaluating a piece of furniture. "You seem to have proper manners. The pay would be triple your usual rate here. Are you interested?" Lucy's heart jumped. Triple pay? That could cover her rent for the next 2 months. She could even send some money to her parents for Dad's physical therapy sessions. "Yes, ma'am, I'd be very interested. What kind of event is it exactly?" "A dinner party at my home. About 50 guests. Local business leaders, politicians, donors. Very upscale." Mrs. Ashworth pulled out an elegant business card and wrote something on the back.
"Saturday at 6 p.m. Dress code is all black, very professional."
"Don't be late." As Mrs. Ashworth handed her the card, Lucy noticed something strange in her smile. It wasn't warm or friendly. It was the kind of smile that made Lucy think of cats watching mice. "One more thing," Mrs. Ashworth added, her voice dropping slightly. "I assume someone with your musical background can appreciate fine instruments?" "I suppose so, yes, ma'am." "Wonderful. I have a beautiful piano in my home. A Steinway grand. Perhaps you'll get a chance to admire it while you're working." There was something odd about the way she said it, like she was planning something. But Lucy was too excited about the money to think too hard about it. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. Triple pay meant she could finally catch up on her student loan payments. Maybe even buy herself a decent pair of work shoes. The ones she had were falling apart. When she got home that evening, her roommate Kelly was making ramen noodles in their tiny kitchen. "You look happy," Kelly said. "Good tips today?" "Better than tips. I got a catering gig for Saturday night. Some fancy charity thing." Lucy couldn't stop smiling. "The pay is amazing. That's awesome. What kind of charity?" "Something for the Children's Hospital. The lady who hired me seems really well connected. Her house is probably going to be incredible." Lucy spent the next few days planning how to spend the extra money. She could finally replace her broken phone screen, maybe buy groceries that weren't on sale for once. The thought of having a little financial breathing room felt like a gift. She researched Mrs. Ashworth online and found pictures from various charity events and society pages. The woman definitely moved in exclusive circles, the kind of people who owned multiple homes and vacationed in places Lucy had only seen in movies. On Friday night, Lucy tried on her best black dress, a simple piece she'd bought for her college graduation. It would have to do. She practiced carrying imaginary trays and rehearsed polite responses to potential small talk. What she didn't know was that Mrs. Ashworth had been planning this evening for weeks. Ever since she'd overheard Lucy humming that complex Bach piece while wiping down tables, Mrs. Ashworth had been curious. She'd made some phone calls, done some research, and discovered Lucy's background at music school. Mrs. Ashworth belonged to a social circle that thrived on entertainment, especially the kind that made them feel superior to others. She'd grown bored with the usual charity dinner routine and wanted something more memorable. The idea had started as simple curiosity, but it had grown into something else. Mrs. Ashworth had told her closest friends about the musical Waitress and hinted that Saturday's party would have a special surprise. "You'll simply die when you see what I have planned," she told her friend Patricia over lunch. "It's going to be absolutely delicious." Saturday morning, Lucy woke up early and ironed her dress carefully. She practiced her best professional smile in the mirror and reminded herself to keep her humming to herself this time. She had no idea that she was walking into a trap. Mrs. Ashworth's charity event was about to become something very different than what Lucy expected. The beautiful Steinway piano wasn't just decoration. It was going to be the centerpiece of a cruel game designed to embarrass her in front of 50 wealthy strangers. But sometimes, life has a way of turning traps into opportunities. Lucy was about to discover that some cages are actually doors waiting to be opened. Lucy stood outside the iron gates of the Ashworth mansion, checking the address on the business card for the third time. She'd taken 2 buses to get to this neighborhood, and now she understood why Mrs. Ashworth had seemed so confident about everything. This wasn't just wealth. This was the kind of money that bought you a piece of history. The house looked like something from a movie. 3 stories, of white stone with tall windows and perfectly trimmed gardens. A circular driveway curved around a fountain where stone angels poured water from golden pitchers. Even the garage looked bigger than Lucy's entire apartment building. She pressed the button at the gate and was buzzed in immediately. A man in a black suit met her at the front door. "Staff entrances around back," he said without looking at her face. "Ask for Miguel when you get to the kitchen." Walking around the house, Lucy could hear the sounds of preparation. People shouting orders, dishes clattering, cars pulling up the driveway. The staff entrance led into a massive kitchen, where at least a dozen people were working frantically. Miguel turned out to be the head caterer, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and flour on his apron. "You must be Lucy. Mrs. Ashworth specifically requested you for front-of-house service." "That's unusual. She normally doesn't know the extra staff by name." He handed her a crisp black apron and a small notepad. "Tonight's menu is fancy stuff, 7 courses plus cocktails. The guests start arriving at 7, dinner at 8. Your job is to circulate with appetizers and keep the champagne glasses full. Think you can handle that?" "Absolutely," Lucy said, tying the apron around her waist. "I've done plenty of catering before." That wasn't exactly true, but how hard could it be? She'd been serving food for 3 years. Rich people's food couldn't be that different from regular food. Miguel led her through the house to show her the layout. Lucy tried not to stare at everything, but it was impossible. The ceilings were painted with cherubs and clouds like a chapel. Crystal chandeliers hung in every room, casting rainbow patterns on the walls. Paintings that looked like they belonged in museums lined the hallways. "The main party is in the ballroom," Miguel explained, opening a set of double doors. "This is where dinner will be served," Lucy gasped despite herself. The ballroom was enormous, with a ceiling that went up 2 stories. Round tables covered in white silk were arranged around a small stage. Fresh flowers, roses and lilies that smelled like heaven, decorated every surface. But what caught her attention was the piano. In the corner of the room sat the most beautiful instrument Lucy had ever seen. It was a concert grand piano, black and gleaming like a mirror. The Steinway logo on the side confirmed that this was the piano Mrs. Ashworth had mentioned. Lucy felt her fingers twitch unconsciously. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Miguel noticed her staring. Mrs. Ashworth had it tuned yesterday. She mentioned something about maybe having entertainment tonight, but she was being very mysterious about it. Lucy nodded, unable to look away from the piano. She wondered who would be playing it. Probably some famous pianist that rich people hired for their parties. She felt a familiar ache in her chest, the same feeling she got every time she saw an instrument she couldn't touch. "Come on," Miguel said. "Let me show you where the champagne station is." The next hour passed quickly as more staff arrived and the final preparations were made. Lucy learned the layout of the house, memorized the wine list, and practiced balancing trays of delicate appetizers. The other servers were mostly college students picking up extra money, but a few were professionals who did this kind of work regularly. "First time working for Mrs. Ashworth?" asked Diana, a woman in her 40s who seemed to know everyone. She can be particular, very focused on appearances. Everything has to be perfect. "What kind of charity is this for again?" Lucy asked while arranging tiny sandwiches on silver trays. Diana gave her a strange look. "Charity? Honey, this is just a dinner party. Mrs. Ashworth has them every few months. She likes to show off for her friends, try new ways to impress them." Lucy felt confused. Mrs. Ashworth had definitely said it was a charity fundraiser for the Children's Hospital. Maybe Diana was thinking of a different event. At exactly 7 o'clock, the guests started arriving. Lucy watched through the kitchen window as expensive cars pulled up the driveway. Women in evening gowns and men in perfect suits stepped out, chatting and laughing like they'd known each other for decades. "Showtime," Miguel announced. "Remember, you're invisible until someone needs something. Smile, be polite, and keep those glasses full." Lucy picked up her tray of champagne flutes and walked into the ballroom. The transformation was incredible. What had been an empty room an hour ago was now alive with conversation and laughter. The guests moved around the space like dancers, everything choreographed and elegant. She began circulating, offering champagne and collecting empty glasses. The conversations she overheard were about vacations to places she'd never heard of, business deals worth millions of dollars, and social events that required months of planning. Most guests barely acknowledged her presence, but a few were polite enough to say thank you. Lucy started to relax. This wasn't so different from working at the restaurant, just with fancier food and more people. Mrs. Ashworth appeared beside her suddenly, wearing a dress that probably cost more than Lucy made in 6 months. "How are you settling in, dear?" Mrs. Ashworth asked, but her smile seemed forced. "I hope you're getting a chance to appreciate the surroundings." "Everything is beautiful, ma'am. Your home is incredible. Thank you. And I see you've noticed the piano." Mrs. Ashworth's eyes glittered with something Lucy couldn't identify. "It's quite special. A 1925 Steinway Model D, the same model used in Carnegie Hall." Lucy nodded politely, not trusting herself to say much about the piano. She was afraid her voice might crack with longing. "I do hope we'll get to hear some music tonight," Mrs. Ashworth continued. "There's nothing quite like live piano music to elevate an evening, don't you think?" Before Lucy could answer, Mrs. Ashworth had glided away to greet other guests. Lucy continued serving, but she kept glancing at the piano. Under the crystal chandelier light, it seemed to glow with its own inner beauty. As the evening progressed, Lucy noticed Mrs. Ashworth watching her. Every time she looked up from serving drinks or clearing plates, Mrs. Ashworth was somewhere nearby, observing with that same strange smile. During a quiet moment in the kitchen, Diana pulled Lucy aside. "Be careful with that woman," she whispered. "I've worked enough of these parties to know when something's up. Mrs. Ashworth keeps asking the other guests if they've met the interesting server with the musical background. That's not normal." Lucy felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you think she's planning?" "I don't know, but whatever it is, it's not going to be good for you. Rich people like this, they get bored easily. Sometimes they look for entertainment in ways that aren't kind." As Lucy returned to the ballroom with fresh champagne, she noticed the conversations had grown louder and more animated. The guests had been drinking for over an hour now, and their laughter had a sharp edge to it. Mrs. Ashworth stood near the piano, running her manicured fingers along its edge. When she saw Lucy watching, she smiled again. That same cold, calculating smile from the restaurant. Lucy didn't know it yet, but the trap was almost ready to spring. Mrs. Ashworth had spent the entire cocktail hour dropping hints to her guests about the surprise entertainment she had planned. She'd told them just enough to build anticipation without revealing her true intentions. The dinner service would begin soon, and afterward Mrs. Ashworth would make her move. Lucy was about to discover that some invitations come with a price that's much higher than expected. Dinner had been served perfectly. 7 courses of food that looked more like art than meals, paired with wines that cost more per bottle than Lucy made in a week. The guests were relaxed now, their faces flushed from good wine and expensive champagne. Lucy was clearing the dessert plates when she heard the familiar sound of a knife tapping against crystal. Mrs. Ashworth stood at the head table, her champagne glass raised for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mrs. Ashworth's voice carried clearly across the ballroom, "I hope you've all enjoyed this evening so far." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Lucy continued stacking plates, trying to stay invisible as she'd been trained to do. "As many of you know, I do enjoy surprising my guests with unique entertainment." Mrs. Ashworth's voice had a playful tone that made Lucy look up nervously. "Tonight I have something very special planned." Lucy felt Diana's eyes on her from across the room. Her fellow server's warning from earlier echoed in her mind. "Be careful with that woman." "Now, I've discovered something quite interesting about our staff tonight." Mrs. Ashworth began walking slowly around the room, like a cat circling its prey. "It seems we have a musician among us." Lucy's stomach dropped. Several guests turned to look around the room, curious about where this was going. "You see, one of our servers, Lucy, dear, would you come here, please?" Mrs. Ashworth's voice was sweet as honey, but Lucy heard the steel underneath. Every eye in the room turned toward Lucy. She stood frozen beside a table full of empty wine glasses, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. "Don't be shy, dear. Come up here." Lucy had no choice. To refuse would mean making a scene, probably losing her job, and definitely not getting paid for tonight. She walked slowly toward Mrs. Ashworth, feeling like she was walking to her execution. "Everyone, this is Lucy. She's been serving you beautifully tonight, hasn't she?" Mrs. Ashworth placed a cold hand on Lucy's shoulder. "But what you don't know is that Lucy has a very impressive background. She studied music at one of the finest conservatories in the country." Lucy felt her cheeks burning. Why was Mrs. Ashworth doing this? This wasn't part of the job description. Now Lucy was just telling me earlier how much she admired my Steinway. Mrs. Ashworth gestured toward the piano with a flourish, and I thought to myself, wouldn't it be wonderful if someone with such training could share their talent with us? The guests were listening intently now, some of them smiling in anticipation. Lucy realized with growing horror what was happening. This wasn't kindness or opportunity, this was entertainment at her expense. "Oh, I don't think that's necessary," Lucy tried to say quietly. "I'm just here to serve tonight." "Nonsense." Mrs. Ashworth's voice grew louder. "False modesty is so unattractive, don't you think? Surely someone who spent years studying music can play something simple for us." A few guests chuckled. Lucy heard someone whisper, "This should be interesting," to their dinner companion. "Mrs. Ashworth, I really don't think this is appropriate. I'm working tonight and I haven't played in years." Lucy's voice was barely above a whisper, but in the quiet ballroom everyone could hear her. "Oh, come now," said a man in an expensive suit from the front table. "Don't be modest. We'd love to hear what our money bought you at that fancy music school." More laughter rippled through the crowd. Lucy realized that Mrs. Ashworth had told them about her background, probably painting her as some kind of pretentious server who thought she was too good for her job. "Yes, do play something," added a woman dripping in diamonds. "I'm curious to see if waitresses these days really think they're artists." The cruelty in her voice was unmistakable. This wasn't about music or entertainment. This was about putting someone they saw as beneath them in their place. Mrs. Ashworth tightened her grip on Lucy's shoulder. "I'm sure everyone would be so disappointed if you refused. After all, what's the point of having talent if you don't share it?" Lucy looked around the room at 50 faces, all watching her with varying degrees of amusement and expectation. Some looked genuinely curious, but others had the expression of people watching a car accident, excited to see something go wrong. She thought about her options. She could refuse and face public humiliation, probably get fired and definitely lose the money she desperately needed, or she could play and face a different kind of humiliation, when she inevitably made mistakes after years away from the piano. I don't have any sheet music," Lucy said weakly, grasping for any excuse. "Oh, surely someone with your training can play from memory." Mrs. Ashworth's voice was dripping with false concern. "Nothing too complicated, of course. We wouldn't want you to embarrass yourself." The way she said "embarrass yourself" made it clear that embarrassment was exactly what Mrs. Ashworth was hoping for. Lucy finally understood what was happening. This whole evening had been planned. Mrs. Ashworth had hired her specifically for this moment, to humiliate her in front of these people for their entertainment. Maybe, just chopsticks or Mary had a little lamb, suggested another guest, causing a wave of laughter. Something more at her level. Lucy felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. These people saw her as nothing more than a curiosity, a servant who had gotten above her station and needed to be reminded of her place. But as she looked at the beautiful Steinway piano gleaming under the chandelier lights, something else stirred inside her. Anger, not just at Mrs. Ashworth's cruelty, but at herself for accepting it. For 3 years, she'd let circumstances convince her that she wasn't good enough, that her dreams didn't matter, that she should be grateful for whatever scraps life threw her way. Mrs. Ashworth guided her toward the piano bench with a triumphant smile, probably already planning how she'd tell this story to her friends tomorrow. The guests were all pulling out their phones now, ready to record what they expected would be an amusing disaster. "Take your time, dear," Mrs. Ashworth said loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm sure you'll do your best." Lucy sat down at the piano bench and stared at the keys. Her hands were shaking, but not just from nerves anymore. Years of suppressed longing, frustration, and love for music were bubbling up inside her like a volcano about to erupt. She placed her fingers on the keys and felt the familiar weight and texture that had once been as natural to her as breathing. The room fell completely silent, everyone waiting for the show to begin. What they didn't know was that they were about to get a very different show than the one they'd paid for. Lucy's fingers hovered over the keys like a pianist preparing for a concert, but her mind was spinning with 3 years of doubt and fear. The Steinway's keys felt cold under her fingertips, so different from the warm, worn keys of the practice pianos at school that she'd spent countless hours playing. The silence in the ballroom was complete except for the quiet buzz of phones recording and the soft clink of someone setting down a wine glass. 50 wealthy strangers waited for her to fail, their faces showing everything from mild curiosity to barely concealed glee. Mrs. Ashworth stood beside the piano with her arms crossed, probably already composing the story she'd tell her friends about the delusional waitress who thought she was a musician. The woman's smile was sharp as a knife, confident that her entertainment was about to begin. Lucy closed her eyes and tried to remember the last time she'd played seriously. It was the day before she dropped out of school. She'd gone to the practice room and played for hours, knowing it might be her last chance. She'd played everything she loved: Bach, Chopin, Rachmaninoff, Debussy. She'd played until her fingers ached and her eyes were red from crying. Now, sitting in this mansion surrounded by people who saw her as nothing more than hired help, that memory came flooding back. But with it came something else. The muscle memory of thousands of hours of practice. The deep understanding of music that had been sleeping inside her for 3 years, waiting. She opened her eyes and looked at the keys again. What should she play? Something simple and safe that wouldn't embarrass her? Fur-Elise, maybe, or one of the easier Bach inventions? No. If she was going to do this, if she was going to let these people judge her, then she was going to give them something real, something that would show them exactly who they were dismissing. Lucy placed her hands in position and began with the opening notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. It was one of the most technically demanding pieces in the piano repertoire, something that even professional concert pianists approached with respect and careful preparation. The first few notes were tentative, her fingers remembering the complex patterns, but as the melody developed, something magical happened. Her hands began to move with their old confidence, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought left off. The room, which had been buzzing with quiet conversation and the shuffling of phones, fell completely silent. The opening of the ballade was deceptively gentle, almost innocent, but anyone who knew classical music recognized it immediately. This wasn't chopsticks or a simple tune. This was serious music. Lucy felt her breathing deepen as she settled into the piece. Her posture straightened, her fingers curved into the perfect position she'd practiced for years. It was like slipping into clothes that fit perfectly after wearing things that were too small for too long. As the music progressed into the more complex middle section, Lucy's confidence grew. Her left hand moved independently from her right, creating the intricate harmonies that made Chopin's music so beautiful and so difficult. The years of practice were coming back to her, not just the technical skills, but the musical understanding that separated students from artists. She could hear people in the audience shifting in their seats, the quality of their attention changing from casual amusement to something more serious. This wasn't what they'd expected at all. Mrs. Ashworth's confident smile was starting to fade. She'd clearly expected Lucy to stumble through something simple and embarrassing. Instead, she was watching a trained musician perform one of the most challenging pieces in classical music. Lucy reached the dramatic climax of the first section, her hands flying across the keys with precision and power. The Steinway responded beautifully to her touch, its rich tone filling the ballroom with music that seemed to make the crystal chandeliers vibrate in harmony. But she wasn't done yet. Without pausing, she transitioned seamlessly into Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, playing the solo piano arrangement that condensed the entire orchestra's part into 10 fingers. This was showing off now, but Lucy didn't care. For the first time in 3 years, she felt like herself again. The Rachmaninoff piece was even more demanding than the Chopin, requiring not just technical skill but deep emotional understanding. Lucy poured everything she'd felt over the past 3 years into the music. The frustration, the loss, the quiet desperation of dreams deferred. But also the hope that had never quite died, the love of music that no amount of struggle could kill. Her fingers moved across the keys like they were telling a story. The gentle, romantic melody that everyone recognized from movies and commercials became something more in her hands, a conversation between longing and fulfillment, between what was lost and what might still be possible. The guests had stopped pretending to be casual observers. Phones were lowered as people became genuinely absorbed in the performance. This was music at a level that most of them had only heard in concert halls, performed by world-renowned pianists. Lucy felt tears on her cheeks, but she didn't stop playing. She was remembering what it felt like to be a musician, to create beauty instead of just serving it to other people. For these few minutes, she wasn't Lucy the waitress or Lucy the dropout. She was Lucy the artist, the pianist, the person she'd always known she was meant to be. The music built to its incredible climax, demanding everything Lucy had to give. Her hands stretched across octaves, her fingers flying through passages that would challenge any professional pianist. The Steinway sang under her touch, its voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom and beyond. As she approached the final section, Lucy realized that something had fundamentally changed. Not just in the room, but in herself. 3 years of believing she wasn't good enough, that her dreams were impractical, that she should be grateful for whatever life gave her. All of that was dissolving with every note she played. She was good enough. She had always been good enough. The music proved it. As Lucy's fingers danced through the final movements of the Rachmaninoff, the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. What had started as cruel entertainment had transformed into something nobody in the room had expected. A concert-level performance that would have been at home in Carnegie Hall or Lincoln Center. The technical demands of the piece were extraordinary. Lucy's hands moved across the keyboard in patterns that required years of training to master, her left hand creating complex bass lines, while her right hand sang out the gorgeous melodies that made Rachmaninoff famous. But this wasn't just technical skill, this was artistry. Every note carried emotion. When Lucy played the gentle, romantic sections, her touch was so delicate that the notes seemed to float in the air like whispers. When the music demanded power and drama, her hands commanded the Steinway with authority that filled the ballroom with sound. Mrs. Ashworth stood frozen beside the piano, her face pale with shock. This was nothing like what she'd planned. She'd expected to watch a struggling waitress stumble through a simple tune, providing amusing gossip for weeks to come. Instead, she was witnessing a revelation that made her feel small and petty. The guests had stopped recording on their phones. You couldn't capture something like this on a phone camera anyway. It had to be experienced, felt in your chest as the music washed over you. Several people were openly staring with their mouths open, completely absorbed in Lucy's performance. At table 3, an elderly man named Professor Henderson sat with tears streaming down his face. He'd taught music for 40 years before retiring, and he recognized exactly what he was hearing. This wasn't just good, this was extraordinary. The young woman at the piano had the kind of musical understanding that couldn't be taught, only discovered. Lucy transitioned into a section that showcased her classical training at its finest. Her professor at music school had always pushed her to find the story within the music, to make each piece a conversation with the audience. Now, 3 years later, that training was flowing through her fingers like water. She remembered Professor Williams telling her class that music wasn't just about hitting the right notes at the right time. Anyone can learn to play the notes, he'd said, but only a true musician can make those notes speak to the human heart. Tonight, Lucy's music was speaking volumes. It spoke of dreams that refuse to die, of talent that emerges stronger after being suppressed, of the power of art to transform both the artist and the audience. It spoke of a young woman who'd been forced to hide her light under a bushel for 3 years, but whose flame had never gone out. The woman in diamonds who'd made the cruel comment about waitresses thinking they were artists now sat in stunned silence. She'd attended dozens of fundraising concerts and charity galas with professional musicians, but she'd never heard anything like this. The raw emotion combined with technical mastery was breathtaking. Lucy reached a particularly challenging passage where both hands had to move in complex patterns while maintaining the musical line. Her years at music school came flooding back, not just the lessons and practice sessions, but the joy of discovery, the thrill of mastering a difficult piece, the deep satisfaction of creating something beautiful. For 3 years, she'd convinced herself that those feelings weren't practical, that music was a luxury she couldn't afford. But now, sitting at this magnificent piano, she remembered why she'd fallen in love with music in the first place. It wasn't about money or career prospects. It was about touching something infinite and perfect in a world full of struggle and compromise. The Rachmaninoff built toward its dramatic conclusion, demanding everything Lucy had to give. Her hands stretched across the keyboard in powerful chords that rang through the ballroom like church bells. The Steinway responded to her touch like a partner in dance, its voice rich and full and completely under her control. In the kitchen, Miguel and the other staff had stopped working to listen. The sound of the piano carried through the entire house, and even people who didn't know classical music could tell that something special was happening. Diana stood in the doorway with tears in her eyes, proud of Lucy and furious at Mrs. Ashworth for what she'd tried to do. As Lucy played the final notes, she felt a transformation happening inside her. The scared, apologetic waitress who'd been clearing plates an hour ago was gone. In her place sat a musician, confident, skilled, and unashamed of her gifts. She'd been hiding from herself for 3 years, but the music had called her back. The last chord faded into silence, leaving the ballroom in a state of suspended animation. For a moment, nobody moved or spoke. The silence stretched, heavy with emotion and surprise and the lingering echo of music that had touched everyone present. Lucy sat at the piano bench, her hands still resting on the keys, breathing deeply. She felt like she'd just run a marathon and climbed a mountain and come home all at the same time. For the first time in 3 years, she felt completely like herself. Mrs. Ashworth stood beside the piano, her mouth slightly open, all her cruel confidence evaporated. She'd wanted to humiliate Lucy, to put her in her place and provide entertainment for her friends. Instead, she'd unleashed something magnificent that made everyone in the room reconsider their assumptions about talent, worth, and the people they barely notice in their daily lives. The silence was about to break, and when it did, nothing would ever be the same for Lucy again. The silence stretched for what felt like forever. Lucy sat at the piano bench, her hands still resting on the keys, afraid to look up and see the faces of the people who had been expecting her to fail. Her heart was pounding, but not from nerves anymore, from the pure joy of having played music again after so long. Then, from somewhere in the back of the room, came the sound of slow, deliberate clapping. Lucy looked up to see Professor Henderson standing at his table, his weathered hands coming together in steady applause. His face was wet with tears, but he was smiling, the kind of smile that came from witnessing something truly extraordinary. "Magnificent," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Absolutely magnificent. For a moment, he was the only one clapping. The rest of the guests seemed frozen, unsure how to react to what they'd just witnessed. This wasn't supposed to be how the evening went. They'd come expecting to watch someone be put in their place, not to experience a world-class musical performance. But Professor Henderson's applause was contagious. The woman at table 5 began clapping, then the couple beside her. One by one, like dominoes falling, the entire ballroom erupted into applause. People were rising from their seats now, the applause growing stronger and more enthusiastic. These weren't the polite, measured claps you heard at most charity dinners. This was the kind of applause reserved for moments that took your breath away. "Bravo," called out someone from the front row. "Absolutely incredible." Lucy stood up from the piano bench, her legs shaky with adrenaline and emotion. She'd performed in student recitals before, but she'd never experienced anything like this. The applause washed over her like a warm wave, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt truly seen. Mrs. Ashworth stood beside the piano, her face a mixture of shock and something that might have been shame. Her cruel little game had backfired spectacularly. Instead of humiliating Lucy, she'd revealed her as a world-class talent that had been hiding in plain sight. The mayor of the city was on his feet, clapping enthusiastically. "That was extraordinary," he called out. "I've heard professional concerts that weren't half as moving as that." A distinguished woman in pearls nodded vigorously. "I haven't been that moved by music in years." "Young lady, that was absolutely breathtaking." The applause continued for what felt like minutes. Lucy looked around the room at faces that had changed completely from when she'd first sat down at the piano. Where there had been smug anticipation and casual cruelty, now there was respect, admiration, and genuine amazement. Professor Henderson made his way through the crowd toward the piano. "My dear," he said, taking Lucy's hands in his, "I taught music for 40 years, and I've rarely heard anything like what you just played. That wasn't just technically perfect, that was artistry of the highest order." Lucy felt tears starting again. "Thank you," she whispered. I haven't played in so long." "Well, you certainly haven't lost your touch. If anything, you've gained something. A depth of emotion that only comes from living, from experiencing both joy and struggle." He paused, studying her face. "Tell me, where did you study?" "Berklee College of Music, but I only finished 2 years. Professor Henderson's eyebrows shot up. "Only 2 years? And you can play like that?" "My dear girl, you have a gift that shouldn't be wasted." Other guests were approaching now, all wanting to speak with Lucy. The businessman who'd made the snide comment about what their money had bought at fancy music school looked genuinely ashamed. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. That was beautiful. I was completely wrong to judge you." A woman Lucy recognized from society photos extended her hand. "Patricia Richardson," she said. "I'm on the board of the symphony orchestra. We need to talk." The woman in diamonds who'd suggested Lucy play at her level couldn't meet her eyes. "I'm sorry," she mumbled. "That was incredibly rude of me. You're obviously very talented." More people crowded around, but Professor Henderson gently guided Lucy to a quieter corner of the room. "Don't let them overwhelm you," he said kindly. "But do listen to what they have to say. I have a feeling your life is about to change dramatically." Lucy looked back at the piano, still gleaming under the chandelier lights. An hour ago, it had seemed like an instrument of her humiliation. Now it felt like the key that had unlocked a door she'd thought was closed forever. Mrs. Ashworth approached them, her earlier confidence completely gone. "Lucy, I don't know what to say." "Perhaps you should start with an apology," Professor Henderson said firmly. "What you tried to do tonight was cruel and beneath someone of your standing." Mrs. Ashworth's face flushed red. "You're right. Lucy, I'm deeply sorry. I misjudged you completely and I behaved abominably. There's no excuse for it." Lucy looked at the woman who had tried to humiliate her just an hour before. She could have been angry, could have told her exactly what she thought of her cruel little game. Instead, she felt something surprising: pity. "I forgive you," Lucy said simply. "Everyone makes mistakes." The applause was finally dying down, but people were still approaching Lucy with compliments, business cards, and invitations. A talent agent pressed his card into her hand. A concert hall director wanted to discuss auditions. The mayor suggested she perform at the city's annual arts festival. Lucy felt overwhelmed but also exhilarated. 3 years of believing she wasn't good enough, that her dreams were impractical, that she should be grateful for whatever life gave her. All of that was crumbling around her like a wall that had been built on sand. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, many of them stopped to speak with Lucy one more time. Phone numbers were exchanged, appointments were made, opportunities were offered. But the most important thing had already happened. Lucy had remembered who she really was, and she wasn't about to forget again. Lucy woke up Sunday morning to the sound of her phone buzzing nonstop on the nightstand. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. Then the memories of the previous night came flooding back. The piano, the music, the standing ovation. The business card stuffed into her purse. She reached for her phone and saw 17 missed calls. 43 text messages and dozens of email notifications. Her heart started racing as she began reading through them. The first text was from a number she didn't recognize. "This is Patricia Richardson from last night. The Symphony Board would like to meet with you this week about our upcoming season. Please call me." Another message was from Professor Henderson. "My dear Lucy, I've been thinking about our conversation all night. I have some contacts in the music world I'd like you to meet. Are you free for lunch tomorrow?" Lucy sat up in bed, fully awake now. Her phone kept buzzing with new messages. A talent agent from New York wanted to represent her. A music festival director had seen a video someone posted online and wanted her to audition. 3 different concert halls were asking about her availability. Wait, video? Lucy quickly opened social media and searched for her name. Sure enough, there it was. Someone at the party had recorded her performance on their phone, and the video was spreading like wildfire. "Unknown waitress gives concert-level performance," read one headline. "Hidden talent discovered at society party," read another. The video had thousands of views already, and the comments were overwhelmingly positive. This gave me chills. Where has she been hiding? Someone needs to sign this girl immediately. Better than most concert pianists I've heard. Lucy's roommate Kelly knocked on her door. "Lucy, there's someone here to see you. Says he's from Channel 7 News." Lucy threw on a robe and found a reporter with a camera crew standing in their tiny living room. Kelly looked completely bewildered. "Ms. Lucy Martinez?" the reporter asked. "I'm Jake Stevens from Channel 7. We'd like to do a story about your incredible performance last night. The video has gone viral and our viewers are fascinated by your story." Viral? Lucy was still trying to process everything. "How viral?" "Over 1 million views and climbing. You're trending on social media." The story of the waitress with hidden talent has captured people's imaginations. The interview was surreal. Sitting in her cramped apartment, still in her robe, Lucy talked about her dreams, her struggles, and what it felt like to play again after 3 years. The reporter was genuinely interested in her story, not looking for drama or sensationalism. After the news crew left, Lucy's phone rang again. This time it was Miguel from the catering company. "Lucy, I have news that might interest you," he said, barely containing his excitement. "Mrs. Ashworth called this morning. She wants to make a donation, a big one, to help with your student loans and get you back into music full-time." Lucy almost dropped the phone. "She what?" "Apparently the lady feels terrible about what she tried to do. The donation would be enough to pay off all your debts and cover your living expenses while you get your career started. She also wants to remain anonymous. Doesn't want any credit or publicity." Lucy sat down hard on her couch. Mrs. Ashworth, the woman who had tried to humiliate her just 24 hours ago, was now trying to make amends in the most generous way possible. But the surprises weren't over. Around noon, Professor Henderson called with an offer that took Lucy's breath away. "My dear, I've spoken with some colleagues at the conservatory. They want to offer you a full scholarship to complete your degree. But more importantly, I've been in touch with the International Piano Competition Committee. They want to waive the application requirements and invite you to compete directly." Lucy knew about the International Piano Competition. Winning it would launch a career instantly. Recording contracts, concert bookings, management deals. It was the kind of opportunity most pianists could only dream about. "Professor, I don't understand. Yesterday I was a waitress who hadn't played in 3 years. How is all this happening so fast? Talent like yours doesn't stay hidden forever, my dear. Sometimes it just needs the right moment to emerge. Last night was your moment." Over the next few days, Lucy's life became a whirlwind. The local news story was picked up nationally. Music blogs wrote about her background and her incredible journey. Record labels started calling. Concert halls from across the country wanted to book her. But the most meaningful call came from her old professor at Berkeley. "Lucy," Professor Williams said, his voice warm with pride, "I always knew you were special. I'm so sorry circumstances forced you to leave school, but look what you've become. The struggle, the heartbreak, the years of waiting, it's all in your music now. You play with a depth and emotion that you didn't have as a student." Lucy realized he was right. The young woman who had left music school 3 years ago had been technically skilled, but emotionally inexperienced. The woman who sat down at Mrs. Ashworth's piano had lived through struggle, disappointment, and the quiet desperation of dreams deferred. That experience had transformed her music from impressive to transcendent. 6 months later, Lucy stood backstage at Carnegie Hall, preparing for her debut concert. The venue was sold out, a remarkable achievement for a relatively unknown artist. But word of mouth about her talent had spread through the classical music world like wildfire. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. The long shifts at Le Jardin, the constant worry about money, the nights when she'd questioned whether giving up music had been the right choice. Mrs. Ashworth's cruel attempt at humiliation that had accidentally become the catalyst for everything that followed. As she walked onto the stage and saw the beautiful Steinway grand piano waiting for her, Lucy smiled. The audience, 2,000 music lovers from around the world, erupted in applause before she'd even played a note. She sat at the bench, placed her hands on the keys, and began to play. The same piece she'd played that night 6 months ago, Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor. But tonight it sounded different. Tonight it sounded like coming home. In the audience, Professor Henderson wiped tears from his eyes. Mrs. Ashworth sat in the back row, having traveled from across the country to hear Lucy play again. She'd never taken credit for her donation, never sought forgiveness beyond that first apology, but she'd followed Lucy's career with the kind of attention usually reserved for proud family members. Miguel was there too, along with Diana and several other servers from the restaurant. They'd become Lucy's unofficial fan club, spreading word about her performances and celebrating every milestone in her rapidly ascending career. But the most important person in the audience was Lucy's father, sitting in the front row in his wheelchair. His physical therapy had been successful enough that he could travel to New York for his daughter's debut. Beside him sat Lucy's mother, who hadn't stopped crying happy tears since Lucy had called to invite them. As Lucy played the final notes of her opening piece, she looked out at the audience and realized something profound. Every struggle, every setback, every moment of doubt had led her to this stage. She wasn't the same person who had dropped out of music school 3 years ago. She was someone who had been tested, who had endured, who had found her way back to her true calling, not in spite of her struggles, but because of them. The applause was thunderous, but Lucy barely heard it. She was already thinking about the next piece, the next phrase, the next opportunity to touch someone's heart with music. She had found her way home, and she was never leaving again. Later, critics would call it one of the most moving debut concerts in recent memory. Record labels would compete for her signature. Concert halls around the world would vie to book her for their upcoming seasons. But for Lucy, the real victory had happened 6 months earlier in a mansion ballroom, when she'd remembered who she really was and decided to stop hiding from her own gifts. Everything that followed was just the world catching up to what she'd always known deep in her heart, that music wasn't just what she did, it was who she was.